Good morning, and welcome to the Fall 2021 SCMI CSI Supply Chain Conference, co-hosted by the UWM Lubar School of Business Supply Chain Management Institute and the UWM Connected Systems Institutes. My name is Jeff Termel. I serve the UW-Milwaukee Lubar School of Business as Director for Business Engagement, and I also direct the Supply Chain Management Institute. We are so glad that you have joined us today for these supply chain sessions to hear how companies locally and regionally are dealing with their unprecedented supply chain challenges. We have a variety of sessions that we've scheduled for you to hear today from businesses in the retail, healthcare, industrial, and services sectors. We encourage you to attend as many sessions of interest to you as you may find, and you can find the links on the conference program email page that was sent to you yesterday or early this morning. Through the day, you'll hear a variety of supply chain approaches by our presenters. Like you, they are dealing with supply chain challenges, and we hope that you hear one or two interesting ideas, or as I call them, nuggets of supply chain wisdom, to adapt to your own supply chain challenges in your organization. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce to you the Dean of the UWM Lubar School of Business, Dean Kaushal-Chari. Kaushal?
Thank you, Jeff, and good morning, everyone. On behalf of UWM's Lubar School of Business and UWM's Connected Systems Institute, I'm so delighted to welcome all of you to today's conference. I must say that the timing of the conference is very timely, to say the least, given the many supply chain challenges we are continuing to cope up with at this time in history. We are truly fortunate to have such an outstanding roster of speakers for you to learn from today. For those of you who are not familiar with our host institutes, I would like to take a brief moment to introduce them to you. The Supply Chain Management Institute at UWM's Lubar School of Business is a unique industry-university partnership that examines supply chain challenges and practices within firms and across a variety of industrial sectors. Member organizations are true partners in the Institute's initiatives, providing direction for the Institute and UWM's curriculum, and have access to supply chain students for applied projects, internships, or employment. Members are engaged regularly in peer-to-peer networking with other supply chain executives at the Institute-sponsored meetings and workshops. The UWM Connected Systems Institute is a collaborative center of excellence involving industry, government, and the academia on Industry 4.0. The center is engaged in research, workforce development, and academic programs related to Industry 4.0 and advanced manufacturing. For more information on either of these institutes, please visit the UWM and the Lubar School of Business websites, or send us a message in the Q&A feature of this webinar, and we'll be in touch with you. Now onto our program. I'm so honored to have the opportunity to introduce this morning's keynote, Rajiv Malik, Senior Vice President of Global Product Services at Kohl's Corporation, who will be speaking on evolving the transformation of merchandise sourcing. Rajiv Malik joined Kohl's nearly 5 years ago, where he focused on all issues related with merchandise sourcing, cost, production, technical specification, and quality for Kohl's private brand products. Prior to this role, Rajiv spent time in management consulting, most significantly with Gap Inc. in various brands and divisions in San Francisco and Asia. With an undergraduate degree in chemical engineering and his MBA from the University of Massachusetts at Lowell, Rajiv is a career sourcing and vendor management executive who has been a frequent global traveler and still maintains those global relationships using Zoom today. It is my sincere pleasure to welcome you to the conference, Rajiv. Over to you.
Thank you and good morning. Thank you, Dean Chari. Appreciate the invite and the opportunity to connect with your students and the community. Thanks, Jeff and Christine, for helping coordinate all of this. Let me share my screen and then we will go from there. So I think you can see my screen now. So like I said, it's a pleasure to be here, pleasure to have the opportunity to share our story. Hopefully, you will find it interesting and intriguing. Generally, supply chain, at least in our world or from our lens, the focus or it stands more for the transportation elements. But behind the transportation elements is a big engine that is out there producing the products, and it has been quite the roller coaster ride, certainly recently, but even in the last 20 odd years. So I'll share a little bit of that with you. Hopefully you find some inspiration or some nuggets of knowledge that you can apply in your business or in your studies. So with that, moving in to the content. Okay, so I'll give you a brief introduction of Kohl's, which is customary. I'll share with you a little bit of the evolution of the industry at large. I'll share with you our end-to-end supply chain from a manufacturing perspective, and then we'll talk a little bit about current events, and then we'll end with an ESG and a diversity and inclusion update in our supply chain, in our sourcing supply chain, so to speak. Okay, so from an introductory standpoint, so some of you or many of you may be familiar, being from the local area. Kohl started off in 1962 in Brookfield as a department store, went public in 92. At that time, there were only 76 stores, mostly in the Midwest. Kohls.com was launched in 2001. And in the early 2000s was really the heyday of growth, when we were opening multiple, dozens of stores on a daily basis on the West Coast and other parts of the country. We launched Kohl's Cash, which was one of the first cash back loyalty programs, still a major mainstay and anchor of how we attract and retain our customer. Yes to You rewards in 2014. And then in the last few years, obviously, the partnership with Amazon, a very significant and quick pivot to, using the store as a delivery vehicle and a pickup, a merchandise pickup spot in 2020. And then most recently, in the last few months, the partnership with Sephora. So it's an evolving business. It's a never, stay quiet and not change business. And some of that is just the environment, and some of that is, just the excitement and the energy in this business at large. Our business overall today, 65 million active customers, 30 million loyalty members, 29 million Kohl's charge card holders. We believe we have the best brands in the business, both at the national perspective and our own private brands as well. And then our stores, 90% of them generate more than $1 million of cash flow. They're mostly off mall, 1,162 stores today in the United States, 49 states, 80% of which are within 15 miles of major population centers. And 43% of our sales are fulfilled by the store itself. And we have about 600 million visits on an annual basis. On the digital side, our business has actually pivoted quite interestingly and nicely, especially over the last couple of years. 40% of our sales today are done online. But if you notice, between 2019 and 2020, we saw a 30% increase in our online business, which was on one hand, certainly not planned, not in this small period of time, but has been a great win for the business, and also presents its own sets of challenges, certainly. So from a strategy standpoint, our big strategy is to maintain growth, maintain our position in the business has been the growth of active as a category. So we are one of the largest sellers of active product, be it shoes or clothing in the country. The growth of beauty, certainly with the partnership with Sephora, has been a major initiative in the business. Reigniting our women's business. Women's is a mainstay. It is a majority of our shopper being female. So making sure we have an exciting assortment for our women's business. And the women's business generally demands a lot of agility, a lot of speed, a lot of innovation, all sourcing-led, competitive advantages. And then the extension of casual lifestyle for the home category, for the home business. Our loyalty rewards program remains a major mainstay, as I mentioned earlier, but the transformation of the role of the store has been something that has been a major pivot and a supply chain initiative. So more specifically, the buy online, pick up in store, and the buy online, ship from store, along with the returns of the Amazon product that we accept, so the reverse logistics. So these are big supply chain initiatives. We won't get into them today, but just so you're aware. And then obviously, in order to enable all of this is the enhancement of digital capabilities, especially even as it relates to the buy online, pick up in store, and the buy online, ship from store, etc. So there's never a dull moment in retail, certainly not at Kohl's. My own team, so I manage the global sourcing and product services team. I get a lot of email from people trying to sell me technology, but I actually don't buy any of it. And the product services that I have, and I will get into that a little bit, are the merchandise product services. So our vision as a team is to provide the business with best-in-class sourcing and vendor management through quality, through driving value, through driving reliability, through driving agility in how we source and bring product to market. We also strive to drive clarity and transparency in cost management in order to drive value either through savings or investments. And you will see some of that. We spend a lot of the company's money on an annual basis, and we are a highly SKU intensive business with a lot of people touching the design and the selection of merchandise. So it becomes a major task to manage both the internal stakeholder and the vendors, so we get the right value for what we are buying in the marketplace. And then we want to be the internal supply chain experts that give our product and sales people the opportunity to delight the customer and beat the competition with amazing product. And amazing product and how we get to market is how we win at retail. So my team is made up of several smaller groups. I shouldn't say small because some of these are fairly large from a headcount and ownership responsibility perspective. So I have the sourcing team, which is the key vendor management, cost negotiation arm of the group. We have a cost analytics team folded under the sourcing team, and a factory direct team folded under the sourcing organization. The cost analytics team, obviously, we're dealing with a lot of dollars. So to understand, how we're spending them, where we're spending them, etc. And then we have a program where we are working directly with factories in Asia versus going through agents, and that's the factory direct team. Our technical design team is responsible for all specifications of our products. So the width and length and the and how they fit. Fit being a major driver of customer retention. When people buy well-fitting clothes, they keep coming back. It is one of those secrets in our industry. We have a production organization which essentially works with the merchandising and design counterparts internally, works with the vendors and agents externally to make sure we're on track with managing our design process, managing our delivery process, working through delivery issues. So they're obviously super busy right now. We have a material, trims, color, and packaging team. So obviously, a large part of cost is actually materials. And you'll see these materials don't always originate or come from the same place that the product is being produced. So this is quite a global industry. We have a QAPI team, and then we have a process technology optimization team. And there's a lot of process that goes along in managing what is a population of maybe 1,000 people who across the house, including design and merchandising, bring our product to a point that we can actually go buy it. So there's a lot of process, there's a lot of technology, systems, tools, etc. So that is the extent of my organization. So pivoting from that, let's get into the evolution of the industry. And there may be things in here that you may have never heard of, or maybe interesting or surprising. I hope it is some of all of that. And then what are the lessons that come out of that? So this industry of wearing apparel has obviously been around since the Stone Ages, right? People wearing animal skins, etc. But in the Middle Ages is when the production or the manufacturing of fabric became an industry, and obviously all handmade in small batches, wooden looms or other processes. So we've seen fabric around, we've seen fabric, silks, etc. for centuries. It's only in the middle of the 18th century that we saw the automated production of fabric. So this is during the Industrial Revolution. And this is really when we saw this industry come to a place where it moved out of the little cottages to actual industries. And this is one of the first industries using automated power to produce at a mass scale. So the manufacturing of fabric was that first industry, and that led to then the invention of the sewing machine. In 1830, this gentleman in Paris produced a sewing machine. He had 80 prototypes that were made to produce army uniforms. These machines were destroyed by a mob of tailors who feared unemployment. And I would say we continue to struggle with adopting technology to this day. It is just one of those things which scares people and is a constant question, although we have come a very, very long way from 1830. You've probably all seen a Singer sewing machine, maybe at home or at a relative's house, at least those of us who are of a certain age. This was invented by Isaac Singer in 1851 in Pittstown, New York, and then the US became sort of the central manufacturing hub of apparel. So the first half of the 20th century, this industry largely was in the US and the United Kingdom. But in the 60s, we saw the rapid expansion of the industry in Asia, particularly in Japan and Taiwan, etc. And that's sort of been the story of the business. And as we move forward, you see how it is now growing and migrating at a massive warp speed compared with sort of the changes that we saw in the mid 18th century and the early 20th century. If you didn't know, so fun fact, a family business known as Toyota Loom Works, established in 1907, was an innovator and inventor of a number of textile looms and cotton spinning machines. This company later became Toyota Motor Car Company. So that is the origin of the automotive industry in Japan is from making looms that made fabric. Toyota also pioneered obviously the agile manufacturing methodology and systems, which have been used by H&M and Inditex and all of the rest of us in building our speed to market strategies. Of course, we're regretting a little bit of that just-in-time mentality right now, but it has served us well for many decades until right now, so to speak. There's a picture of this automated overhead material handling system called the Eaton System, which we see in factories all over the world today, also developed partly by some of the principles of flexibility, waste reduction, and efficiency that came out of Toyota. So some interesting innovations coming out of some of the Toyota in particular, and companies out in the Far East, which is where most of the manufacturing business sits today. So this industry in large, so coming into the last 20 years, we've seen the growth of the industry from 2005 projected to 2025 to double. From 500 billion to 1,000 billion, and that includes fiber, fabric, home textiles, apparel, yarn, and other ancillary products around this, which all make up the apparel industry. So it's a healthy, growing industry. There's a lot of employment. There's a lot of commerce that takes place in soft goods, in apparel in particular. And in case you're wondering where all this growth is coming from, so we've found this very interesting slide out there. So from 2000 to 2015, the number of units produced have grown from 50 to 100 billion units. So that's double. And this follows essentially the growth in world GDP. So as world GDP grows, more people can afford and purchase clothing and apparel. And the other really interesting phenomena that is happening is the reduction in utilization. Actually people buying more clothes and wearing them less often. So, having more choices. So if you're in the closet business, this is also very good news for you. So that is partly where growth comes from, is people buying more and wearing less frequently, as opposed to also people buying more because they have more disposable income to do so. That is certainly the case in Asia, in China, in India. And for us here in the US, that's an interesting phenomena, because what used to be capacity which was built and only used by us or the EU is now competing for customers in local markets, which is a challenge from, you would think, from a cost perspective, from a supply perspective, etc. And it is certainly. So moving on. So what do we consider as the drivers of sourcing decisions? So within our business, there's a whole plethora of reasons why or why not, to choose a geography, to choose a supplier, etc. But labor certainly, drives cost of goods. It is about 20 to 25% of the cost of goods, depending on the type of product. There are certain products which have a lot of make, some that have very little make. A lot of the new machinery is constantly trying to improve labor productivity by automating or actually stitching faster, etc. Capacity is another big, another big driver. So where can you find reliable capacity? And sometimes that follows where the labor market is, for sure. And then sometimes it follows, some of the other criteria, especially regulation or local manufacturing incentives. And this industry, being a ground floor industry, generally employing people who are unskilled and then skilling them up, finds a lot of production capacity in countries where there is ample labor and very little training or qualification. Quality, social compliance have become table stakes. Businesses like us will not venture anywhere near poor quality or suspected social compliance, ESG governance norms. And then comes supplier service. This is a business with with a lot of SKUs, with a lot of variety. We don't necessarily produce the same thing for more than 3 months, maybe 6 months at a time. So you need suppliers who are agile, who are able to change very quickly, retool, rebuild, etc. Becomes a big driver of success for a supplier. Trade regulation, both imposed by the US as an importer and by local markets in the incentives they provide their manufacturers is a major driver of where the capacity goes, where the business goes with it. Raw material certainly drives many of these decisions. A majority of finished fabric today still does come out of China. So and you will see further down, China still plays a significant role as a manufacturing resource, but countries around China in the India subcontinent are beginning to tool up. The raw material production is actually fairly capital intensive, as opposed to the garment production is heavily labor intensive. So they don't always sit in the same place or in the same geography, which is a challenge for our business. And that takes us to transit time and speed to market. So one element of transit time is, of course, getting goods from the factory to our distribution centers and our stores. But the other aspect of transit time is getting raw materials from raw material manufacturing centers to garment manufacturing centers. And that itself can sometimes take several weeks. And then, the speed to market, that is partly the transportation piece. It's also partly how you manage capacity, how you manage call dates. This is a business where, you make decisions on raw material, you make decisions on color, you make decisions on silhouette, you make decisions on, printing, etc. So there's a lot of decision points. And all of these decision points, we try to make as close as possible to the actual season. For example, right now we are buying essentially, next summer's product. So we've just finished summer. We're in the process of buying next summer's product. So in less than a year, we will reproduce and rebuild and then make and deliver thousands of SKUs, all from scratch, mostly from scratch. And that takes us to innovation and sampling. So, vendors have to have tremendous amount of capacity to, help us with innovation and then make samples of prototypes. And these are the things that then define that vendor relationship and how successful it can be, etc. Sustainability is, I would say, somewhat new, but becoming table stakes. There's a lot going on in this area, both from a from a social compliance perspective, but also from a material availability perspective. And I'll get into that in a second. So these are some of the big, decision criteria that we go through in building, vendor selection, building order award, and managing where and who we produce goods with. Super dynamic, very complex, but lots of fun. So we talked about labor a little bit. So certainly, manufacturing capacity does follow to some extent where labor is and what the cost of labor is. These are not minimum wages. These are average total salary. While we are an entry-level ground floor industry that takes people who have no skill and then trains them, very few operators of sewing machines actually make minimum wage. They become highly skilled, and in order for them to be productive, there's a lot of incentives and there's a lot of reward in place to drive that. So just to give you an idea, China is about at the $10,000 mark, and then you have Bangladesh at the 1,800 mark. So quite a variation in what the total annual salary is of a worker. These are certainly well in line with wages in these geographies, and these jobs are considered fairly well in the sense providing a livelihood in countries where there are sometimes very few opportunities. In Bangladesh, for example, apparel manufacture makes up about 15% of the GDP of that country. So it's quite a major industry in Bangladesh, bringing millions of people into the job market. And providing training and obviously, sustenance. To talk about the regulatory environment a little bit, so I'll go back to 1992, which is when the first major regulation was signed in the US that started impacting how we source. So that was NAFTA. which was the elimination of trade barriers between the US, Canada, and Mexico. And remember, a lot of garment production in many categories was done in the US at that time. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization, and that led to the elimination of import quotas in 2005. So until 2005, the US imposed limitations on how much you could import from any country by product classification. So we were essentially forced to go make goods in countries just because they had import quotas. For example, I was a frequent traveler to Dubai in those days because Dubai had an unlimited supply of men's bottoms quota. So, chinos, khaki pants, for example. So we had factories in Bahrain, in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi that produced woven pants. Our labor was 100% imported from the India subcontinent. Management was 100% imported from other parts of the world. And it was basically an artificial setup because there is just not the labor locally available to produce these goods. And the minute quotas were lifted, all of those factories moved out of there and moved back to India or Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or other parts of the world. 2004 CAFTA was signed, so a free trade agreement between the US, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. And we, after 2005, with the elimination of quotas, with the signing of these free trade agreements, sort of got into the free trade world of manufacturing of apparel. And we enjoyed quite a few years of relative stability in where and how, rather where we could produce goods. The financial crisis was not as much a supply chain issue for us than it was a customer issue, but certainly the cotton crisis of 2011 is what most people remember as the most challenging time in the industry. Cotton yarn rather, which is used to then make, cotton fiber rather, which is then used to make yarn and then used to make fabric. Cotton fiber generally trades at between 60 cents to 90 cents a pound on the global market. And because of certain, just the environment, it went over $2 a pound, and we saw significant shortages. And that was a probably 6 to 7 month period that the industry went through tremendous strain in trying to understand how to price goods, how to even procure raw materials. And like I said, we all remember that as the biggest challenge we ever had. And then once we got through that, we started moving towards, again, we got relative stability. TPP, the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement, was one of the big trade events on the horizon, which of course never went through, but that resulted in seismic changes in where production capacity was built in anticipation of TPP coming through. Then, of course, we got into 2018 and the world started changing. China tariffs came into play, and we all thought that was the worst thing in the world until, we got hit with COVID, and now we have the logistic issues. We have factories in Asia, which are now limping back to normal, but was certainly an interesting period in the evolution of the industry, and then inflation. I'll get into some of this in the pages, in the following pages. But to share a little bit about how this impacted the industry. So when NAFTA was signed, we saw a pivot to Mexico. A lot of the production in the US moved into Mexico, particularly in denim, and Mexico continues. Well, Mexico became the #1 exporter of apparel into the US after NAFTA was signed. That lasted until 2005, when quotas got eliminated, and we saw a massive pivot towards China and other production centers in the East. Central America, even till today, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, major center of production for knit apparel, particularly things like t-shirts, etc. And then in that period between 2005 and until the China tariffs hit, we saw the rise of fast fashion, and speed became a major driver of success. Obviously, we saw the rise of Inditex and H&M and Primark, etc. So all of us in the US tried to emulate that, try to adopt those strategies. The design pipelines shrunk tremendously. The production timelines shrunk tremendously. We were much closer to season than we've ever been. So of course, certainly with TPP, we saw significant capacity build up in Vietnam, which is now the second largest exporter of apparel to the US, only after China. And even after TPP didn't pass, I mean, the capacity was already built, so it was being utilized. And interestingly, as factories got shut down during COVID, Vietnam was probably the most heavily impacted country in the world from a factory or industry shutdown, at least the way we experienced it. And it is essentially our largest center of manufacturing today from an apparel perspective. The China tariffs, while they were challenging, I would say we were prepared for it because one could see the challenges in China, both from a cost perspective, other elements of intellectual property or even currency, etc. So we were somewhat prepared for it, I would say, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So just moving on very quickly, you can see in 2000, where Mexico was the largest importer, Mexico steadily declined and is probably now not even in the top 5. China by far became the largest exporter of apparel into the US. This is apparel and textiles, along with Vietnam. So it's really, China, Vietnam, and then everybody else is, sort of down the line after that. Where we are today, so it's an interesting graph. So knitwear and woven garments. So this is just the first half of 21. You can see China is about 21.5% of US imports on knitwear and 24.2% on woven garments. Vietnam is second at 19 to 17%. And then after that, you get into certainly Bangladesh has done a great job on the woven side. Because they are able to get fabric both locally and from India and Pakistan. But on the knit side, most of that production either sits in China, Vietnam, and a lot of it in Central America, because there is some fabric availability in North America for knit apparel, or it comes in from Asia. Interesting fact though, majority of our factories in Central America are owned by Korean conglomerates who also own factories in Vietnam. So they have sister factories in Central America. And they are the ones who are running that business for the most part. On the woven side, after Bangladesh, you have India, and then Mexico with denim, Indonesia, Cambodia, etc. So mostly an Asian supply chain. After the first two, fairly fragmented from a country of origin perspective, and it follows many of those things I talked about, labor, regulation, raw material, etc. Raw material, so cotton is a primary raw material in the industry, of course, along with polyester. Cotton mostly comes out of China, India, the United States, Brazil, and Pakistan as well, not on this slide, but these are the major countries of production of cotton fiber, which then gets produced into yarn and fabric in the same country or in other countries. The US is mostly exporting this cotton to Asia. Cotton prices, fluctuate on a daily basis. They follow production, consumption, harvest, rains, drought, so on and so forth. We are again sitting at, for the first time in many, many years, cotton fiber, which is over $1. So there's a lot of inflation in the cotton markets. Nowhere near the $2 plus we saw several years ago, but certainly getting up there today. So another challenge for us. From a price perspective, so even with everything going on, a lot of the regulation, a lot of the other challenges we've had, this has been a deflationary industry. Our average unit cost of US apparel imported into the US has gone down almost every year for the last 20 years. So the cotton crisis saw some increase in price, and that again all sort of worked itself out of the system in 2 to 3 years, and we were back to historic lows in 2020, almost back to 10 years ago. Of course, 21 and 22, we'll see what the graph does, but certainly it's not looking as good as it has been. This is a unique or interesting challenge for the industry because we're not used to dealing with inflation. We're not used to dealing with higher prices of commodities. We've always seen commodity prices go, even if they didn't go down, we've seen productivity and automation drive lower prices. We've seen, even though wages have never gone down, essentially, we've seen automation and productivity and new frontiers open up that have helped us, get better pricing and costing. So it's been an interesting 20 years in the industry, but today we are at a juncture where many of these old assumptions have all gone out of the window. So cost is going up, transit times are going up, labor availability is at an all-time low in the industry. So these are very interesting yet challenging times for us. Sustainability is the other thing which we are all addressing, dealing with. So a good 97% of raw material comes from virgin feedstock, whether it be cotton or polyester, etc. A majority of that through the life cycle of product, which may include some amount of recycling, which may include some amount of, you could say, production loss, which may include a substantial amount of reuse. So, either the original customer wears it multiple times, or it goes through other channels where it is resold, either within the US, for example, or in other geographies, but eventually ends up in a landfill or incinerated. And this is a challenge that the industry has to deal with, especially as raw material prices go up. There is a further incentive to then recycle. Today, only about 1% of fabric is recycled, essentially back into fabric. About 12% gets recycled into things like home insulation or mattress stuffing, etc. But a majority of it does go to landfills eventually over its life cycle. So this is a big challenge for us. We're trying to address this head on. We'll talk about it a little bit. So a few slides on our supply chain at Kohl's. So we'll try to do some fun facts. I'm not sure how well this will work. So we'll use the chat feature, I believe. So, okay, I already jumped the gun on that one. So the question was, how many units per year do you think we order in our private brands? So since I already gave that one away, so we import, or we sell close to 500 million units per year in our private brands. So quite a large number of units. The next question is, how many ports of shipments do we get these goods from? So how many countries or ports around the world do we get these goods from? 5, 16, or 27? And I don't know if we'll be able to get the chat function here if someone wants to take a guess. If not, I'll give you a couple more seconds and I will put the answer up, or you can just test yourself at your screen. So it's 27. So we have 27 ports of origin, active ports of origin around the world. And how many containers do we then use to bring these goods in? So I'll let you guess, and then I will. So 60 to 65 TEUs. Kohl's is the 26th largest importer or utilization of containers per year in the US. So these are public figures. The first is Walmart, and the second is Target, I believe. How many buying offices do we have at Kohl? So a buying office is young women's tops, young women's bottom, young women's sweaters, men's sweaters, men's tops, men's bottoms, so on and so forth. So these are all individual departments that manage a P&L, that manage a category of product for a certain category of customer. 35. So we have 35 individual departments that are buying product that my team then services. That means there's 35 individual design teams, and then 35 individual production teams as well. How many styles or SKUs, unique styles, I won't say SKUs, but unique styles do we order annually? So it's somewhere between 20 to 50,000 unique styles to produce those, 400 to 500 million units. So you could see, and we generally work on seasons, so 4 seasons a year. So within each season, we're probably in the 15,000 range of unique styles across those 35 offices to make up those 400 to 500 million units. And then how many units do we process through our distribution centers? That is almost 1 billion units. So, okay, I will move faster. Our countries of origin, so obviously, heavily penetrated in the Far East. So China, India, Bangladesh. We have a significant number of factories in Central America as well. And then from a country of production perspective, Vietnam is our largest country of production, followed by actually Bangladesh, and then China and Indonesia, India, Sri Lanka, etc. We have been reducing our China penetration over the years, even pre-tariff. We are trying to manage and balance our Vietnam production. We think we are overexposed in that region, but the only other place to go really is the India subcontinent. From a current event standpoint, so as we got into the COVID closure, so in June of this month, we saw factories in Bangladesh, Cambodia, Haiti, India, Jordan, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam beginning to close down. That continued to happen till September. And in October, factories have started opening up again. But our on-time percentage, we usually are a 90–95% on-time business. Our on-time percentage fell dramatically in this period. We started moving goods from India to Bangladesh. We started moving from Vietnam to Philippines, Indonesia, Guatemala, etc. So very quickly pivoting and moving. So of all of our active factories, 56% of our factories were actually shut down or impacted in some way or the other. We added, and this is usually a very long drawn out process for us. It takes several weeks or even a couple of months to get a factory approved, because we do QA inspections, social compliance inspections, etc. So we started doing these inspections either remotely or through third parties in those countries. But we added 35% more factory capacity in the last 6 months in order to find available capacity to produce goods and then diverted raw materials to these new factories. So you can see the rolling closure of factories by country. As we saw, factories in India shut down first, and then Bangladesh, and then mostly Vietnam in July, August, and September. We added capacity. So almost for every factory that was shut down, we were adding a factory within a 3 to 4 week period. And this is a testament to, a very clear sourcing strategy pre-pandemic, very clear alliances with our vendors, and a lot of good data and information that we use to successfully manage the China tariffs. Prior to that, quick decisions, agile thinking. So, we made changes in process, we made changes in rules, we introduced new protocols, we set up clear accountabilities for who's responsible, not just for approving factories, but who's responsible for moving raw material, moving trims, making sure goods are made at the right quality. So a lot of very, very quick, clear decisions, agile thinking, and then a lot of empowerment. So our vendors go back with us, decades in many cases. So a lot of engagement and empowerment of these vendors, and a very frequent and close communication with them on the ground, along with our agents, and then weekly updates on everything that was going on. As we move forward, obviously, we are trying to nearshore more and more into Central America as much as we can. We are trying to diversify into the India subcontinent. That's really where a lot of the raw material and labor is. It certainly has its challenges, and that is what has sort of slowed down that transition. And then the continued engagement and empowerment of vendors. And then from an inflation standpoint, a lot of material consolidation, a lot of longer term commitments, a lot of booking goods early, and then a lot of cost engineering itself. So with that, I will quickly wrap up with the ESG update. So I will just breeze through these slides. So we have some major commitments out there that 100% of our cotton fiber will be sustainably sourced by 2025. 50% of our polyester will be made of recycled materials by 2025. All of our rayon will be compliant with essentially not using any endangered forest. And then our denim production will be 100% water and discharge free by 2025. Many of our brands are already meeting these goals or very close to meeting these goals. From a D&I perspective, our big initiative is really prioritizing and investing in diverse owned businesses and doubling our spend by 2025 with these diverse and minority owned businesses. And we use several third party or external organizations to help us find these vendors and build our policies and practices. So we're happy to share this information. We're happy to support others who may be interested. So I think with that, I will end. I may be over time.
No, Rajiv, we've got just a couple of minutes, but there is a question about how is Kohl's, we've all heard in the news the current capacity issues around container imports, shipping. How is Kohl's adapting to those? Were there any lessons learned for Kohl's in changing the strategy or tactics around the current capacity issues of shipping and containers?
Yeah. So I think nobody is really immune, and there's probably not a silver bullet. But when we started seeing some of these constraints coming on board, we very quickly started trying to get capacity with some of the faster shipping lines. So whether it be Matson or Zinn, etc. Now, not all of that held up. In many cases, these shipping lines perhaps reneged or perhaps backed out of commitments. But we did book a lot of capacity on faster shipping vessels coming out of Asia. We were basically buying obviously containers at higher prices, but we have some very solid contractual commitments. But outside of those contractual commitments, then mix adjusting or price indexing into more expensive containers. Especially, we have goods that are advertised. We have sweaters that are not going to sell in January for the same price. So making some smart decisions around, what would be the, loss due to markdown versus loss due to paying more to ship goods. We run a pretty promotional business. The price you can get in October or November, you're not going to get in January. So a lot of decisions had to be made on that front. And I think COVID kind of taught us that, because when we went into the COVID crisis in March of last year, we developed a muscle of making very quick decisions, trusting each other, putting bets on the table, which, I'll use an example. We built the pickup from the store capability in 2 weeks. In normal times, that would have been a 6 months project with probably a few $100,000 or $1 million in consulting fees. So the thinking has changed in that sense, being agile, risk and trust, and you'll make some mistakes, but there's no silver bullet, obviously. We did change ports, we trucked goods around, we air freighted goods around to some extent.
Right. Thank you very much. And a tough question for anybody in any sector today.
Yeah.
Rajiv, I think we're at time. There are a couple other questions. We will try to answer those to you directly in the Q&A, but we need to wrap up this session to kind of keep the trains on schedule. So Rajiv, thank you for sharing the insights into the complexity of your global supply, your global international customer base, and just the challenges of making those two ends meet. We thank you for the insight into Kohl's, and we wish you and the business continued success in the face of all these challenges, and we thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it.